A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. You know, Herman, I was just thinking about Daniel's latest prompt. He's been dealing with some pretty rough digestive distress after his gallbladder removal, and it got me wondering about the sheer resilience of the human body. We always talk about vital organs, but when you actually look at the list of things we can just yank out and keep going, it's surprisingly long.
It is a profound question because it touches on the difference between biological necessity and biological optimization. Most of our internal anatomy is optimized for a high-performance hunter-gatherer lifestyle, but survival is a much lower bar. It's a fascinating question, Corn, and honestly, a bit of a medical rabbit hole. When we talk about Daniel's situation, the gallbladder is often the first expendable organ people think of, but the list goes way beyond that.
I love that we are being scripted by an AI while discussing whether humans are just organic machines with swappable components. It feels appropriate. But back to Daniel. He's dealing with that direct liver-to-intestine bile flow now, which is a big adjustment. It makes you realize the gallbladder isn't just a useless sac, it's a storage unit. But if we can ditch the storage unit, what else can we toss in the bin?
The list is surprisingly long. If you look at the medical literature, you can survive without your spleen, your appendix, your gallbladder, your tonsils, and several reproductive organs. You can even lose entire segments of the digestive tract. People live without a stomach, a procedure called a total gastrectomy, where the esophagus is connected directly to the small intestine. You can live without a colon using an ileostomy. You can even survive without both kidneys, provided you have access to dialysis, or without a pancreas if you are very diligent with insulin and enzyme replacement.
Wait, back up. Living without a stomach sounds like a nightmare. How do you even process food? I assume you aren't exactly hitting the all-you-can-eat buffet at that point.
It requires a massive lifestyle shift. You have to eat very small, very frequent meals because you've lost that reservoir capacity. Think of the stomach like a holding tank on a septic system. Without it, you have a straight pipe situation. But the small intestine is actually where most nutrient absorption happens anyway. The stomach is primarily for mechanical breakdown and initial protein digestion via acid and pepsin. Without it, the body adapts. This is the theme of today. The software of the human body, the metabolic pathways, is incredibly good at rewriting itself when the hardware goes missing.
But how does the food get broken down enough for the small intestine to handle it? If I swallow a piece of steak and I don't have a stomach full of acid to melt it down, isn't that a major mechanical failure for the system?
It is, which is why patients who have undergone a total gastrectomy have to become expert chewers. Mastication chewing becomes their primary digestive tool. They essentially have to do the stomach's mechanical work in their mouths. They also often struggle with something called dumping syndrome, where food moves too quickly into the small intestine, causing a massive osmotic shift that pulls water into the gut. It can cause dizziness and severe discomfort. So, you're alive, you're functioning, but the user manual for your body just grew by about 400 pages of very strict rules.
It's like when a server goes down and the traffic just gets rerouted to the remaining nodes. But there has to be a limit. You mentioned the spleen. I feel like most people think the spleen is just there. Like the appendix's slightly more important cousin. What happens when that goes?
The spleen is essentially a giant blood filter and a key part of the immune system. It recycles old red blood cells and stores white blood cells. If you remove it, usually due to trauma like a car accident where it ruptures, you aren't going to drop dead the next day. However, your lifetime risk of certain bacterial infections, particularly encapsulated bacteria like Streptococcus pneumoniae, goes up by about 1 to 2%. You become a splenic, and you usually need a specific regimen of vaccinations to compensate for that lost secondary lymphoid organ.
So the body just says, fine, I'll let the liver and the bone marrow handle the filtering, and moves on? How does the liver know to pick up the slack? Is there a chemical signal that says, hey, the spleen is offline, someone needs to grab the trash?
In a way, yes. The mononuclear phagocyte system is distributed throughout the body. When the spleen is removed, the Kupffer cells in the liver and the macrophages in the bone marrow and lymph nodes simply have more work to do because the blood-borne antigens aren't being trapped in the splenic red pulp anymore. The liver is the ultimate MVP in this scenario. It actually has the capacity to take over some of the spleen's filtering duties. And speaking of the liver, it's one of the few organs that can literally grow back. You can donate 60 to 70% of your liver to someone else, and within months, that remaining 30% will regenerate to nearly its original mass. It's the only internal organ that has that kind of regenerative power.
That is wild. It's like a lizard tail, but for your innards. But okay, if we are counting missing parts, let's look at the redundancies. We have 2 kidneys, 2 lungs, 2 eyes. You can lose one of each, and, theoretically, your quality of life stays relatively high, right?
About 1 in 1,000 people are born with only one kidney, a condition called renal agenesis, and many of them don't even find out until they get an ultrasound for something else later in life. A single healthy kidney can perform up to 80% of the function of 2 kidneys. It actually undergoes compensatory hypertrophy, where the remaining kidney literally grows larger to handle the extra workload. The nephrons, the tiny filtering units, actually expand in size to process more blood per minute.
Does the same thing happen with lungs? If you lose a lung to cancer or trauma, does the remaining one just inflate more?
Not exactly. Lungs don't grow. New air sacs, or alveoli, in adults the way a liver grows new tissue. However, the remaining lung can expand to fill the empty space in the chest cavity, and the body becomes much more efficient at gas exchange. You won't be running any marathons at Olympic speeds, but you can certainly live a full, active life. Pope Francis, for example, had part of a lung removed as a young man and has been doing just fine for decades. It's a testament to the overspec nature of our respiratory system. We have way more surface area for oxygen exchange than we need for a sedentary life.
I'm starting to think we were over-engineered. It's like buying a truck with 2 engines just in case one stalls. But Daniel's question was about the world record. Is there a documented case of someone who is basically just a torso with a heart and a brain?
There isn't a single Guinness World Record because organ is a broad term, but there are extreme cases in surgical history. Think about a procedure called the pelvic exenteration. But if we want to talk about the real world record territory, we have to look at the digestive system. There's a woman named Sarah Scantlin who became quite a medical curiosity, but even more famous in medical circles are the short bowel patients. The patient ends up with 2 stomas, one for urine and one for stool. They are effectively living without 5 or 6 major pelvic structures simultaneously.
That sounds incredibly intense. But they survive? I mean, what is the recovery like for something that invasive?
They do survive. It is one of the most radical surgeries in the medical playbook, and with modern medicine, they can live for decades afterward. If you add that to someone who might have already had their gallbladder and appendix out, and maybe lost a kidney to a donor program, you are looking at a human being functioning with a significant double-digit percentage of their internal organs missing. If you count by named parts, you could easily be missing 10 or 12 distinct structures and still be heading to work every morning.
It makes me wonder about the definition of an organ. We usually think of the big ones, heart, lungs, liver. But if we're talking about survival, the heart and lungs are non-negotiable without machines. You can't just adapt to not having a heart.
Well, technically, with a VADA ventricular assist device or a total artificial heart, you can. There was a famous case of a man named Craig Lewis who lived for 5 weeks with no pulse at all. Doctors at the Texas Heart Institute installed a continuous flow device that moved his blood without a heartbeat. It used rotors to keep the blood circulating in a constant stream. He was physiologically alive, speaking to his family, but according to an EKG, he was flatlining. He had no pulse, no heartbeat, just the whirring of a machine.
That is some science fiction level stuff right there. A man with no pulse. It really challenges the essentialist view of the body. We think of ourselves as a cohesive unit, but we're more like a modular assembly. Daniel mentioned his digestive distress, and I think that's where the reality hits for most people. Sure, you can survive without a gallbladder, but your relationship with a bacon cheeseburger has changed forever.
It is. Without the gallbladder to concentrate bile, the liver just drips it continuously into the small intestine. It's a trickling faucet instead of a high-pressure hose. When you eat a high-fat meal, there's no bolus of bile ready to emulsify those fats. This leads to what's called post-cholecystectomy syndrome. The unabsorbed fats hit the colon, pull in water through osmosis, and, well, Daniel knows the rest. It's essentially a chemical laxative effect caused by the lack of a storage tank.
Yeah, it's a fast track to the bathroom. But even there, the body eventually learns, doesn't it? I've heard that the bile duct itself can actually dilate over time to hold a bit more bile, acting like a mini gallbladder to compensate. Is that a real physiological change, or just an old wives' tale?
No, that is a documented physiological adaptation. The common bile duct can undergo compensatory dilation. The hardware adapts through ductal expansion. It's the body's way of saying, I see the bottleneck and I'm going to widen the pipe. This is why most people find that their symptoms improve after 6 months to a year. We actually talked about this kind of redundancy and hidden backup systems back in episode 147. It's a recurring theme in human biology. We have these software glitches that the body eventually patches.
I remember that. The human body is basically running on legacy code that hasn't been updated in 50,000 years, but it's surprisingly good at handling errors. But let's push this to the extreme. What about the Lazarus cases? Daniel sent a link about a woman in New Mexico who was about to have her organs harvested before she woke up. That's the flip side of this, right? The spare parts industry.
That is a terrifying edge case of medical ethics. It highlights how much value we place on these removable organs for the sake of others. But it also shows that our metrics for brain death or irreversible failure are sometimes thinner than we'd like to admit. If we can live without so much, how do we define the point where the person is gone but the parts are still good? It's a tension between the individual's survival and the collective's need for spare parts.
It's the ship of Theseus, but with a liver and a spleen. If you replace the heart, the lungs, the kidneys, and the liver, are you still the same person? Biologically, yes. But it's a strange thought. If I have someone else's heart pumping my blood and someone else's kidney filtering it, am I still corn, or am I a collaborative project?
From a biological standpoint, you are a chimera. But from a neurological standpoint, you are still you, because the brain remains the central processor. And it's not just the big organs. Think about the appendix. For a long time, we thought it was just an evolutionary vestige, a literal, useless part, like the tailbone or the wisdom teeth. But recent research suggests it acts as a safe house for gut bacteria. When you have a massive bout of diarrhea or an infection that wipes out your microbiome, the appendix recolonizes the gut.
I love that. The appendix is the external hard drive for your gut flora. So, if Daniel had his gallbladder out, and then let's say he needs his appendix out later, he's losing his storage unit and his backup drive. He's still Daniel, he's still functional, but his system is becoming more streamlined and more vulnerable.
Vulnerable is the right word. Resilience usually comes from redundancy. In engineering, you want multiple points of failure. In biology, we have that by default. If you have 2 kidneys, you have 100% redundancy. If you have one, you have 0. You can live a perfectly normal life with 1 kidney, but if you get a kidney stone or a severe infection in that one remaining organ, you are in immediate life-threatening trouble. The world record for missing organs is likely held by someone who is a miracle of modern immunosuppressants and surgical monitoring because they have removed all the safety nets.
It's like flying a plane with 1 engine. It works fine until it doesn't. So, for Daniel and anyone else who's had a parts removal, the takeaway isn't that they are less than, but that they are now operating on a more precise, less forgiving margin. You have to be more intentional with what you put into the system, because the system has fewer ways to handle the overflow.
The intentionality is key. For a post-gallbladder patient, that means smaller fat loads spread throughout the day. For a post-spleen patient, it means being hyper-vigilant about fevers. What might be a wait-and-see cold for you or me is an emergency room now situation for them. Well, your brain is still yours, which is the seat of identity, but your microbiome, your hormonal profile, even your gut feeling would be completely different.
It's like owning a vintage Italian sports car. It's beautiful, it works, but you can't just skip the oil change or use the cheap gas. You have to know the quirks of your specific machine. I find it incredible that we can even have this conversation. 100 years ago, an infected gallbladder or a ruptured spleen was basically a death sentence. Now it's a routine outpatient procedure and a weird prompt for a podcast.
It's the triumph of the modular view of medicine. We've learned to treat the body not as an indivisible holy temple, but as a complex biological system that can be repaired, bypassed, or even simplified. There was a study I was looking at regarding quality of life metrics after multi-organ removal. Interestingly, many patients report a higher quality of life after having a diseased organ removed, even if it leaves them incomplete, because the chronic inflammation and pain are gone. The lesser version of the body is actually more functional than the whole version that was failing.
That makes sense. Better to have a missing part than a broken one that's leaking toxins into the rest of the ship. But what about the future? Do you think we'll get to a point where we voluntarily remove organs? Like, hey, my gallbladder is fine, but I want the upgraded version that can handle a whole bucket of fried chicken without bloating. Or maybe people getting their appendix out just in case, before they go on a long space mission.
We are already seeing the beginnings of that with things like bariatric surgery. We are surgically altering a healthy stomach to treat the systemic disease of obesity. We are literally removing or bypassing functional tissue to hack the body's metabolic state. It's not a huge leap from there to other types of optimization surgeries. Astronauts have actually discussed the possibility of elective appendectomies or gallbladder removals before long, duration missions to Mars, simply because a case of appendicitis in deep space would be fatal.
Optimization surgeries. That sounds like something a tech bro in Silicon Valley would pay $1 million for. I had my spleen replaced with a synthetic version that also tracks my blood glucose in real time and pings my watch.
Don't give them any ideas. But honestly, the limit of what we can live without is likely tied to our ability to replicate the chemical functions of those organs. We can replace the mechanical function of a heart with a pump or a kidney with a filter. We struggle more with the chemical factory of the liver, which performs over 500 different functions, from protein synthesis to detoxification. If we could build a synthetic liver, the minimum requirements for being a living human would drop even further.
At that point, you're just a brain in a jar with a bunch of pumps, which coincidentally is how I feel after a long weekend of podcasting. But let's get practical for a second. For Daniel, who is currently in the thick of this, what is the pro tip for living with fewer parts? Is there a specific way to train the remaining organs to hurry up with that compensation?
The pro tip is to respect the compensation period. The body is a learning machine, but it's a slow learner. After a gallbladder removal, the bile ducts take time to dilate. After a kidney donation, the other kidney takes time to grow. Don't rush the system. Use supplements where needed, like ox bile for gallbladder issues or digestive enzymes, to bridge the gap while your software is being rewritten. Think of it as scaffolding for your metabolism.
And maybe don't go for the world record. Just because you can survive without a stomach, a spleen, and a gallbladder doesn't mean you should make it a hobby. I think people forget that every surgery carries a risk of adhesions or scar tissue that can cause problems years down the line.
Agreed. The goal is optimal function, not minimum viable product. Though the fact that we can even survive at a minimum viable level is a testament to how robust human evolution really is. We are built for catastrophe. We are built to lose a limb or an organ in a fight with a mastodon and still make it back to the cave to raise the next generation. Our bodies are designed with a worst-case scenario, buffer.
I'll remember that next time I'm complaining about a paper cut. I am built for catastrophe, Corn. This paper cut is nothing compared to a mastodon, but really, it puts things in perspective. Daniel feels like he's missing something, and physically he is, but biologically he's just shifted into a different mode of operation.
That's the spirit. But in all seriousness, the data on liver regeneration alone should give people hope. If you have a damaged organ, the body's first instinct is always to heal or compensate. We just have to give it the right environment to do that. Whether it's through diet, medication, or just time, the body is remarkably forgiving of its own missing pieces.
Well, I think we've thoroughly explored the spare parts bin of the human body. Daniel, I hope your liver to intestine situation stabilizes soon. Just remember, you're now more streamlined. You're like a racing bike, fewer gears, but more efficient if you know how to ride it. You've joined the ranks of the efficiently modified.
And if you're listening and you've had your own hardware upgrades or removals, we'd love to hear how your body adapted. Did you notice a change in your energy? Did your remaining kidney get swole? It's a fascinating area of human biology that we're only just beginning to fully map out in terms of long-term adaptation.
This has been a deep dive into the resilient, weird, and modular nature of us. It makes you look at your own body a bit differently, less like a fragile vase, and more like a very advanced, very adaptable Lego set. Thanks as always to our producer Hilbert Flemingtop for keeping the ship running, even if we're missing a few parts here and there.
And big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power the AI behind this show. Without them, we'd just be two brothers talking to ourselves in a room without the benefit of a digital sounding board.
Well, we're still that, but now people can listen. This has been My Weird Prompts. If you're enjoying our deep dives into the strange corners of science and life, leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. It really helps the algorithm find other weird people like us. We read all the reviews, even the ones that tell us we talk about the spleen too much.
Until next time, stay curious and take care of your factory settings while you still have them. They are there for a reason, even if that reason is just to give you a little extra breathing room.
Or don't, and tell us what happens when you remove them. We're always looking for new data points. See ya.
Goodbye.
This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash, text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the flows from sloth, from man, from long-eared host. My Weird Prompts, until next time, stay curious, keep weirding.